Good morning, everyone. Welcome joining us on this Saturday morning. This is our second Silicon Valley Asian American Pacific Islanders Civic Leadership Summit. We have put together a program that I think will be a great use of your time this morning, hopefully to join us together, to connect us in conversation, in thinking, in inspiration to move ahead in this unusual and unprecedented time as we moved into the elections in November. As many of you probably know by now and have felt the same as I have, this feeling of shock and really sadness over the passing of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg yesterday. This is something that was, I guess, unexpected and can be a bit disheartening. But I hope that this is something that can bring us all together to regroup and to see how we will move forward. I would like to ask that we respectfully take a moment of silence just to remember what she stood for, work that she has done to bring rights and civil liberty, justice for all of us. And just a moment of silence before we start, and just to dedicate today's summit in her memory. Bringing us back to today's program to continue, we have a wonderful agenda prepared for you. I want to mention that thank people for registering. We have over 250, 244 is the last count of folks registered for this summit. It's a higher number than last year, and we're not sure where you're registering from. Definitely from Silicon Valley, Bay Area, California, and the rest of the United States. Welcome to you all. We had a very thoughtful team of conveners, the same conveners as last year. I want to acknowledge as we move forward. Asian Law Alliance Executive Director Richard Konda has been really key in our whole effort in guiding through us through the agenda and panel. And so he will be speaking at the end to give the closing remarks. And then with him, his staff, Efrain Delgado, he will be presenting the call to action. So this will give you many different opportunities that you can look at how to make good, do something to help with the election mobilization that is going on right now. I want to also thank Asian Americans for community involvement. As our convener, Sarita Kohli, CEO, who has really supported this effort, and also Andrea, who has been, Andrea Hyde, who has been really key in helping us with our panel and organizing our panel. Great thanks to them. And then to Civic Leadership USA, Anthony Ings, the CEO there, who has offered much in terms of advice and guidance and also technical support. Thank you so much for all your support. My name is Michael Chang. I am the Executive Director of Asian Pacific American Leadership Institute. And with me today is Anthony Lay, who is in the background handling a lot of the technical side of things, and also Van Nguyen, who is also helping us there. So also, I would be remiss I do not thank our many community partners. All the community partners, thank you for coming together, outreaching to your groups and your leaderships and your members and your friends to be a part of this summit. We hope to give you much useful information. I should mention in our agenda that Professor Teku Lee just emailed us this week because of personal reasons. He is not able to join us today. We hope that we would be able to have him on the program next year. The other thing is that we are remiss not to have an ASL interpreter. Definitely keep that in mind for next year. I'm going to go ahead with the agenda today. The agenda highlight is going to be two things. One will be our panel. We have a really wonderful panel prepared for you. And then a call to action, which follows that. So I am going to go ahead and ask that we start the video. We have a video. So the panel today is going to be about a dialogue about
anti-Blackness is like Filipino food. So
the panel's title is a dialogue about racism and solidarity, a pivotal moment for Asian and Black communities, to get us to start thinking about anti-Blackness and our own attitudes. Unfortunately, anti-Blackness exists throughout society, and Asian Americans are definitely not exempt from that. And I think hopefully this video, as well as our panel, will give us a lot to think about and a lot to reflect and have dialogues with our own family and our friends. So over to the video now.
Anti-Blackness is like Filipino food. Some of it is found in our colonized past, and it's always been present growing up in our family traditions, our community culture, and even in the media we consume.
There's this idea, particularly in the Philippines, that if you're darker, you're working out in the fields, right? If you're light-skinned, you don't have to work in the field. So there's classism that is tied into the color of one's skin.
Filipinos are naturally dark. In fact, the indigenous people of the Philippines value their dark skin as spiritual and celebrate it through religious ceremonies.
How do we value dark skin now?
Am I beautiful even if I'm dark?
Why are we told that lighter skin makes us more beautiful?
If your standard of beauty is white, then how do you look at me?
Is my nose too big?
Mom, you better talk
Pastor Dante. He said when he makes money, he's gonna fix his nose.
Yep, that's me and my mom, apparently quoting me. Have you ever been a part of seemingly harmless, funny banter? Anti-blackness is a learned behavior.
When we say we're just old-fashioned, it's widely used, whether we know it or not, as in to excuse our anti-blackness behavior. At a family dinner, my grandfather is sitting across the room from me, and we were talking about having kids, and he said, just as long as they're not black. And it was even more alarming because it was excused right away, because Grandpa's a good man.
Can good people be anti-black?
Sometimes even good people can carry anti-black behaviors, and it has to do with the culture we grew up in.
Anti-black attitudes can be as small as pointing out one's darkness as a problem rather than a beautiful trait.
The role of anti-blackness is beyond pervasive in our families and our communities. So much so that most of us are silent about it.
Why did I grow up feeling like I had to change myself to fit in?
The assimilation factor that many of our Filipino families adopted when they came to the States made it even harder for them, for us, shoot, for you, to look in the mirror and say goodbye to the whiteness that you see there.
This is about fully examining and interrogating ourselves first, then our family, friends, and community.
These conversations must begin at home, not just on social media where your inner circle already agrees with you, but with family members who might not share the same perspectives when it comes to race and privilege.
We as Filipinos have the privilege that we will never face the same racism as Black people do. We need to recognize that privilege and acknowledge that our struggles are tied to Black struggles.
Where do you think our civil rights came from?
Filipinos should care because our very rights and freedoms as Filipino Americans are a direct result of the Black liberation movements of the past and of the present.
You can take action on a larger scale by supporting the Movement for Black Lives, the Bulasan Center for Filipino Studies, Lead Filipino, AAPI Women Lead, Kabataan Alliance, and the National Alliance for Filipino Concerns, or NAFCON. By support, I do mean money. I also mean people power. I also mean your voice and your story. Bring your lolos and your lolas, your manangs and your manongs, bring them all to the party. Let's learn together. And if you are Black and Filipinx like me, tell your story, at least to your family. It is 100% on you to put that noise, the systemic racism behind you, and walk into a more loving, accepting version of you who's ready to co-create a brand new world with the rest of us.
So here we are. We have the ability to be the ancestors that our descendants will look to for guidance, to be on the right side of history, to be the first discussion against whitening soaps, to be that constant affirmation to our children that their noses, hair, skin, and body types are beautiful. And when that time comes, and believe me it will if it hasn't already, that we're faced with the question by our Black brothers and sisters, does my life matter? What will you say? Black Lives Matter.
Do you see me differently because I openly support Black lives?
Do you only want Black music, but not Black people?
Don't we all just want our kids to be safe?
Why are we told that lighter skin makes us more beautiful?
If I'm Black, does that make me less Filipino?
So I want to also bring us back and show a couple of the questions that we asked when folks are registered for the summit. The first question, first slide, is what are some important issues affecting your community? And as you could see from this, a lot of people mentioned different things. Anti-Asianness, anti-Blackness, things that are on their mind include the pandemic, educational access and affirmative action, police brutality and accountability, and voter engagement, and there are other things on each other's minds. The other slide I would like to report back is when we asked the questions of you, when you registered, how did you describe the relationship between Asian Americans and Black communities? These are some of the words that were mentioned the most often. As you could see, these are words that make us understand that there is still a lot of work to be done, right? that so many of these words are words that creates a barrier between us, distrustfulness, disconnected, distant, misunderstood, ambivalent, fractured, adversarial. Of course, there are other words that give us hope: improving, allyship, equity, friendly, united. So I'm going to go ahead and thank our panel. We have a particularly wonderful panel today. I want to thank Meredith Curry, who's going to be our moderator. And I'm going to be asking Meredith to introduce the panel topic a little bit more, and then also the panelists. I just want to thank them in advance. Reverend Jeff Moore, leader in the Black community here, Dr. Connie Wan, Susan Hayase, and Eric Chang. Meredith Carey identifies as Black and Filipino daughter of a single mother, raised her in Sacramento, the Philippines, and then East San Jose. Mer, as we like to call her, developed her career in Los Angeles for 13 years before returning to San Jose, California, where she co-founded a statewide college access nonprofit and now supports over 15% of California's public high school students. Today, Mer is the owner of a Bay Area consulting firm. She's the director of an ed-tech nonprofit called Money Think in Oakland, and she's the executive director of the Northern California College Access Coalition. Most recently, she's also been elected as the chairperson of the Santa Clara County Commission for the Status of Women. Turn to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. C. Can everyone hear me all right? I really appreciate the warm introduction, and just a thank you to the Silicon Valley Asian American and Pacific Islander Civic Leadership Summit for inviting me as this morning's panel moderator. I'm so grateful to have participated in AAPI Civic Leadership Program, class of 2019, and it gives me great pleasure to advance the work of promoting civic engagement, not just here in the Bay Area or in California, but across the whole country. And I want to just say thank you for sharing that video. A huge shout out to One Down and Palms Up Academy for putting it together. And thank you also to Angelica Cortez, Executive Director of Lead Filipino, who recruited me to be a part of that video. It was seriously a dream, y'all, to be with Dante Basco, AKA Rufio from Hook, AKA Prince Zuko from Avatar: The Last Airbender, just promoting love and solidarity. It was also a humbling opportunity to tell my story of being Filipina and Black. And it is because I'm at the intersection of these two cultures, having grown up in the Philippines as a young girl, and then the rest of my adult life here in the Bay Area, that I feel very privileged to talk to you all this morning about the pivotal moment we're in to have this dialogue around API and Black solidarity with this incredibly esteemed panel. So I'd like to go ahead and get started by introducing you to our panelists. First, we have Eric Chang. Eric J. Chang is the Deputy Attorney General for the State of California's Department of Justice. He also serves on the board of directors of the San Francisco nonprofit Chinese for Affirmative Action, which has 5 decades of civil rights achievements. Eric is also a former federal prosecutor and a former corporate lawyer. I'd also like to introduce you to Susan Hayase. Susan Hayase is the co-founder of San Jose Nikkei Resistors, an inclusive, multi-generational grassroots organization that unites and mobilizes the Japanese American community to take action. She was a leader in the National Coalition for Reparations during the Japanese American Redress Movement. Susan also served as vice chair of the Civil Liberties Public Education Fund Board, which was a result of the legislation. Thank you and welcome. We'd also like to welcome today Pastor Jethro Moore II, who currently serves as president of the San Jose Silicon Valley NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. He also serves as a commissioner and legislative chairperson on the Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training, also called POST. Pastor Moore serves on the Juvenile Justice Commission of Santa Clara County, the 2020 Census Steering Committee, and the Valley Water Environmental and Water Resources Committee as vice chair. Welcome, Pastor Moore. And I want to send a lot of love and shout outs to Dr. Connie Wun, who joins us today as co-founder of API Women Lead, an organization that works to end all forms of violence against Asian and Pacific Islander self-identified women and girls. She is a community-driven researcher who has consulted and led research projects across the US on issues including police violence, school discipline, gender-based violence, racial and gender justice. Most recently, API Women Lead raised over $10,000 to support young people across the United States who are leading mutual aid work in their communities. Let's just all take a moment to send our panel some love and gratitude. We're so excited to have you all here with us. Please send them your love in the chat. All right, panelists, are we ready? I'd like to go ahead and jump into our questions so that our audience can get to know you better, your incredible work, and know how to get engaged in the issues we're going to talk about today. So the first question is directed to all of our panelists, and what I'm going to do is name you off by the order that I see in my screen. So Eric, you're on deck. The question for you all is, in your own individual efforts to create safe and meaningful spaces to discuss racism in and around your own communities, what has true dialogue looked like? And what could it look like?
That's a great question, Meredith. So first I want to thank all these great host organizations and community partners for putting this together. It's a real bummer that we can't do this together in person, but this is a really great event nonetheless. To answer your question about creating safe spaces to talk about racism, I think it requires two things. The first is recognizing why these conversations are hard in the first place. And then two, what can we do about it? So one, these conversations are hard because people don't want to say the wrong thing, right? When we talk about race and inequality, you run the risk of someone rejecting your belief. And it's tougher than just, someone disagreeing with your opinion that, LeBron is better than Jordan. Because when we talk about race and inequality, it's deeper than that, right? We're talking about who we are. We're talking about our perspective on how the world should be. And so even when you're talking about something small, like kneeling during the national anthem, the background conversation is huge. And if you don't realize that that's the real conversation that's happening, or that's the conversation that's happening in the back, it's tough. And so recognizing that is the first step. Second, I think it's recognizing that there are differences in perspective and that we need empathy to address that. And so, sometimes to work together and solve the problem, we need to validate the other person's views and really just make sure that they're heard and that they're understood.
Thank you so much, Eric. I super appreciate especially the note about people don't want to say the wrong things. And sometimes you just got to get comfortable with saying what needs to be said and letting go of control of how they take it, right? I would love to ask Dr. Connie to go next.
Good morning, everyone. First, I want to thank, the organizers. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Anthony. Dr. Chang, thank you so much for the introduction. This is really exciting, so I just want to say that much. And then in light of some of the things that Ruby Rivera said in her video, I do want to take a moment to thank the stewards of this land, who are the indigenous people of what folks are calling the Turtle Island, or specifically where I'm from in Oakland, the Chochenyo people. So I think that's important as we think through solidarity to remember whose land we are currently living on. On that note, when we think about these conversations around race and racism, I wanted to take two different approaches. I want to answer you all kind of individually, and then I want to answer you all organizationally, right? Because the personal is, of course, political. So one of the things around creating safe and meaningful spaces to discuss racism, I think in my personal experience, What has not only been challenging, but also important is to remember the longer standing history of racial violence against Black, Indigenous, Asian, and other communities of color. I think one of the challenges for our communities is to remember the histories of violence that our experiences are made of. And by that, I mean specifically for the communities I have worked with and are engaged with, Asian and Pacific Islanders, we have to remember the legacy of colonial violence. As a Vietnamese woman born in Oakland, I think about, how often we do not talk about the wars in Vietnam. We don't talk about it as a racialized war. We don't talk about the intergenerational traumas that many of our communities continue to suffer from and survive through. That, I think, is a part of the challenge for our communities to talk about race, because we don't want to think about the ways in which our experiences were exceptionally racialized through legacies of colonial violence and imperialism. So on that note, I think about these discussions around race and racism as ones that are rooted in having to take inventory. You have to take inventory around your own experiences and our community's longstanding histories of violence and survival. That means we have to take inventory beyond this moment, but also think about how our communities got here and whose lands we occupy. That also means we have to think about take inventory of our histories and our privileges, right? So individually, you want to think through, for me as a Vietnamese woman, I think through my history, and then I think through the privileges that I have and how they were acquired through anti-Blackness and through anti-indigeneity, consciously or unconsciously. We have to take inventory of these things, right? And so that makes, I think, for a very humbling conversation when we want to talk about true dialogue. It is a very humbling one to recount and then to be accountable, right? So in that respect, I want us to think through organizationally. At AAPI Women Lead, what we try to do in terms of fostering true dialogue, or at least dialogues, is we host movement building series across the country. Here in the Bay Area, we've hosted a number of them. And what we do in these spaces, and I think it's important to do that generally speaking, is we do political education to remember the histories of violence. And then we have our communities, Amer has been a part of them, Andrea has been a part of them, where we have conversations with each other to account for the impacts of violence, racialized violence, gender-based violence. And then we go and we tell our own stories, right? So generally speaking, AAPI Women Lead hosts these spaces for people to have these conversations, right? I think about that. I think about our youth leadership program, where our young people will continue to have these conversations among themselves. And it's contextualized around a longer history for folks to remember the history of violence. And I keep emphasizing that. AAPI Women Lead, we're really big on solidarity. So the objective when going into conversations is always to be in solidarity with the communities that we are working with. And we don't think about, Asian and Pacific Islanders as siloed communities. We think of them in relationship to everyone else, which means we have to be accountable to each other, right? And we think about taking care of one another. And that to me is what, talking about racism and dismantling anti-Asian violence, anti-Blackness, and anti-indigeneity could look like. It looks like a world where we are accountable to one another. Hope that's helpful.
So helpful, Dr. Connie, and thank you so much for that. And I just, as we all pay attention to this conversation today, there's going to be a lot of opportunity to, as Dr. Connie mentioned, take inventory of our histories and our privileges. We're going to get to have some of that exposure to the ancestral traumas that we're still, as Dr. Connie mentioned, suffering through and struggling through. And I think it's super important that also as we're listening, all of the different panelists here today have in their own ways created safe spaces. And how can you create a safe space yourself for this true dialogue that we're all really looking for? And again, I just want to say thank you to this panel for, in your own way, creating the safe space this morning for everyone here today. So I'd like to ask Pastor Moore for you to go next.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me and allowing me to be a part of this most important discussion. And Dr. Connie hit on so many of the direct issues of when she hit history. I just melted, I guess you could say. Let me read a quote from Frederick Douglass. Said, "The life of a nation is secure only while the nation is honest, truthful, and virtuous." So today, as we look at where do we go, where do we go at this moment in reality, we understand the reality is connected to a racial construct. In order to be successful and to move forward as a community, we must understand the history of the issues within our communities. Asian communities have been routinely pitted against Black communities. We must acknowledge that and know what's going on. And when we know how the enemy works, we can then take on the enemy and turn those situations to our favor. Dr. King said, in the days ahead, we must not consider it unpatriotic to raise certain basic questions about our nation's character. Today we ask of this nation, where is this nation at? Where is this nation going? See, we must get comfortable and know our own stories. We must understand who we are. We must have our own values and morals and goals and aspirations, and then bring them to the table together. Be willing to openly discuss issues of race. We must develop a love for humanity. It means respect and honor for all the pain of each of our individual paths. As I watched the video, my skin got goosebumps on it. Because all that was telling me is that even over in the Philippines, they're taught to hate themselves and not to love ourselves. We must turn that picture and learn that all of our culture is beautiful. And all of our cultures come from different hues and we have different makeups. And so we must be able to take that back. So that's the beauty of us as people of color. And when I prepared for this, I was like, I like to look at the history of things. And one of the first people to become a samurai outside of Japan was a Black man. So we have a history of coming together and knowing how to work together. When we look at the history of the 60s, the solidarity of the 60s, of the Asian and Black community coming together and understanding there was a problem and that we had a common problem and we learned to take that common problem on. And the time of murders and mistreatment, those of us who sit at the doors and work at the companies and have the opportunities to open doors, it's time for us to open up the doors. It's time for us to look at our grandparents or our great ancestors, and as they struggle with understanding that Black people or Asian people are all of the same. There's no difference. Our common foe is ignorance. We must come together to destroy this ignorance that's eating America today. And I'm just thinking, as the government just yesterday went after TikTok because of his relationship with China. I said, it's funny they did not turn on Russia because of the mistreatment. And again, you see they're white or they're European, but they go after a nation of color. We must call those realities out, and hopefully we can come to agreement. So how do we get this all done? It's through conversations like this, through gatherings like this, through time spent together by supporting one another. And I want to let this group and the people out there in Zoom land know that I don't use the word ally, because when I use the word ally, it sometimes tells me that I have something different than you. I love to call you my brother, my sister, because I'm in a family with you. And that's the family of humanity. And we must take on all the injustice that are faced in our nation together, one step at a time, one politician at a time. And if they do not understand unity, we must not have the ability to not vote them into office, even if they look like us. If they don't stand with us, if they're not for us, we must exercise that vote and vote them out. I thank you, and I'll listen to the next person. Thank you.
Pastor Moore, there is so much love coming into the chat for your remarks, and I just want to thank you so much. And I want to echo a phrase that you said, which is that our common foe is ignorance. And spaces like these to talk are to, you know, come at that ignorance one conversation at a time, one issue at a time. And again, I'm so grateful that all of you are here today to sharing your wisdom so that we can fight at this issue of ignorance, again, one issue at a time. So I would like to ask to close out this question, Susan.
Thank you so much. I want to thank the convening organizations and the organizers, and thank you, Meredith, and I'm so honored to be here. How do we create a safe space? So before Japanese Americans fought for redress, we didn't have a safe space to talk about race and racism. But since then, we've talked about it a lot because it's a huge part of our history, the forced removal and incarceration during World War II. And some Japanese Americans, we take the next step and we talk about racism that happens to other people. But unfortunately, a lot of times, despite the fact that our history is so often cited by other people, sometimes there's pressure on all of us, I think, to be a little isolated. But with San Jose Nikkei Resistors, we've decided to not be so isolated. And we know that to communicate, you have to be open, and you have to be open in both directions. You have to be open to talking when people want to talk to you. And we have to be open to talking, initiating with other people. So I want to just give you two really brief examples of things that we did this year. We were invited earlier this year by a wonderful organization called MAIS, which develops leaders in the Latino community, young women, and they do cultural advocacy and participation in the community. And they asked us to do a workshop to talk about our story and to answer questions about how we fought back and organized for redress. And that was a very rewarding interaction. And as I mentioned, sometimes it means that we have to take the initiative and stick our neck out and ask other people. And in the aftermath of the murders of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, among others, we decided to ask Reverend Moore, who is very well known and respected in the San Jose community, to come and speak to us at our program, which we called Nikkei for Black Lives. So those are some of the kinds of things that we do. But there's another thing that I've been thinking, and that is, you know, a lot of times people talk about communication in terms of talking to their family or their neighbors. In San Jose Nikkei Resistors, we think a lot of where this discussion is going to take place is in the public arena. And as an organization, we feel it's really important to set the tone, and we have to organizationally create the space for dialogue to take place so that people can refer to what they've heard, you know, and talk to their families about it. But we've got to do something in the public arena. So those are my thoughts on creating dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan. I really appreciate that, especially that you gave us a tangible example of how you bring the two groups together by you actually inviting Pastor Moore to speak to the group about the issues around Black Lives Matter. And I'd actually like to use that to transition to our next question that I'd like to go ahead and direct to Pastor Moore. And that is, you know, many of those who are watching here today are here to better understand how to better support and stand in solidarity with the Black community. And we appreciate you've shared some of that already. You know, the fact that we have a history of coming together and getting to know each other. So the more we can learn about that, the more we can build off of it. Even some of the way we talk about ourselves. So even switching from the word ally to something that feels much more intimate of brother or sister, so that we can really see our true connections to each other. What does solidarity look like, Pastor Moore? How can Asian and non-Black communities bridge the gap between how we think we should help and what the Black community really needs from us right now? And then also, what are specific activities, if you could build on that question, what are specific activities and campaigns that we could engage in now or in the near future that you're aware of or working on?
Well, thank you again for that question, and thank the Nikki Resistors there. I forgot to mention you gave me a beautiful drum beat to go with some of my words, and my mother just loved it. I loved it, but my mother really loved it, you know. And right off the top of my head, when you say think about something that we could work together on, there's one thing. I was over on First Street just the other day, and the county is using it as an emergency response center, but I found out the history of the building is actually the Japanese embassy. And I said, on the old Japanese embassy, and I said, and over on the outside of this building, does it identify what historical place this is? So things like that are some of the problems I think that we could come together when, you know, and begin to work on as a community. Sits just on this outskirts or entrance into Japantown. But like I was saying earlier, those closest to the problem are also closest to the solution. We must recognize that we don't have all the sides of the story when you're dealing with the Black community and knowing the Black community. So how do you get to know our community? How do you get to be part of our community? And some of it is just consuming or taking time to get to the Black books or the Black stories or the Black writers or the Black events. Especially online now, there's so much you can Google from the story, but I would even say most of our stories are hand in hand and side by side. That's what we have to start admitting. The struggles that we have against white supremacy has all been common, and we must understand when they turn that on us to use it against us. So one is, again, I want to say read books. If you not have the courage to meet somebody or to befriend someone that doesn't look like you, then read, go to the movies, some movies, you know, and all of us, none of us are portrayed by the movies so correctly, I want to say. Find out what you don't know, and then listen to understand, then speak to be understood. Asking questions will show a willingness to learn, to understand. You have to ask the questions, and it's having these conversations. We need to speak up to your family and your friends when you hear something that's off-colored or not exactly true. You know, the misnomers, and one thing that I have always loved about the Asian community is the way they just took control of when they had those derogatory characters on TV, you banned them. You took them off. You said, no more will you be portrayed that way. Help the Black community present those same positive images of ourselves when you see them showing up at work or at play. Question and evaluate where you work at, whether your hiring practices are fair. You're at these jobs, you're at these corporations. Some of you sit in personnel, it's a question. You know, if you see too many people of one color, or especially Black people getting let go or not getting hired, begin to ask the question, why? You're sitting there. You're there. You have the position and the ability to make change. And then you have to ask yourself the question, what does your leadership look like in those companies or on those philanthropy, on these boards? When you look at the board and look across and you see nobody of color when you come there or you make your donations there, ask, where's the money going? If an injustice moves you, just do something to acknowledge that feeling. You know, you have to figure out what you can do personally, because it starts each personally, individually. And always, one of the hardest parts for the Black community or for us a lot of time are donations, for getting philanthropy, getting support for our events and for our organizations. We most of the time don't have people in positions that can help move us forward financially. And I'm not asking for a handout. I'm asking this to be shown where the door is. James Brown said, I don't want nobody to open the door, I get it myself, but it just showed me how to get in there. Help us to do that. Help us to be sustained. Like the biggest movie we had in the last year, everyone's been crazy about, has been Black Panther. We could do more movies like that. And I just want to close with one thing is when I tell people know our history. Spain is 45-minute boat ride from Africa. So all of our cultures have been cross-mingling for years through the old trade. And just want to ask you, what have you done lately? As Janet said, when can you come and talk with a Black person and ask them how do they feel? In Santa Clara County in particular, when we are often marginalized and isolated. We don't have a big Afro center, or we don't have any big construction or building that holds our history in San Jose. What I guess we could do as a big project here would be to build a civil rights museum of Santa Clara County, or a museum of culture in Santa Clara County, a place where we could all go into and see the different cultures of all of our organizations inside. From the Olympic team, the Japanese Olympic team at San Jose State, the wrestling team, the karate team, the sprint team, and just the history of Japanese when they came, the Asians when they came, the Filipino side of town. We can capture all of that, the Latino side of town, and put this history, even the Italian, we can put this history of San Jose together and have one place that when people come to the 10th largest city in America, there's actually a museum that houses our history as a community and as a county. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pastor Moore. I think it's so important. You've given us quite a few things to chew on in terms of how we need to make sure that we're actually engaging in understanding and learning about the Black community's current issues, how they're feeling, the ways that they can be supported, hearing right from them, even to the note about the Black Panther movie. Like there's a lot of issues around just how things are funded that Pastor Moore's explained in terms of the access to individuals who can actually open the doors to have access to the funding to support projects, whether it's a nonprofit, whether it's a movie that really tells an accurate story. So there's a lot of ways that we can support the Black community by just creating introductions, by just opening a dialogue, by just listening, and then moving with the flow of that conversation to see how you can support. And what I also just want to highlight is, you know, the intersection between, or the parallels between Dr. Connie earlier saying, because the personal is of course political, and this note from Pastor Moore that it really is important that we think about how individually, if injustice moves you, do something to acknowledge that feeling and let that be individual, and don't feel the need to be driven in any way by anyone other than justice that really moves you and what you can do about it. So thank you so much, Pastor Moore, for that. I'd like to ask Dr. Connie to answer the next question. And that is, given the current climate by which Black, Indigenous, Asian, and other communities of color are experiencing increased rates of racial violence, can you share with us a glimpse of what you see happening to and with communities of color? And can you share with us your thoughts on community building and solidarity, what that looks like, how it gets built? Why is this conversation important, especially right now?
Thanks for the question. And thanks, Reverend, for your remarks. I wanted to kind of highlight really quickly your point around not handouts. I actually think, you know, a lot of the people that I work with now and our organization works with, we think a lot about the importance of mutual aid, and mutual aid as a response to the current climate, but also as an ongoing practice among Black, Indigenous, and other communities of color. And when I say mutual aid, it means no strings attached. It means that we take care of each other as an ethos and as a culture, so that no one has to qualify it with handouts. It's because I'm taking care of you that I'm sharing my life and my resources with you. And I can only hope for the same in terms of us being in family and community with one another. So I wanted to share that out and follow up on your point. So back to Mayor's question, I want to have us really think through this issue of what's going on with all of our communities. And by doing that, and in doing that, I want us to expand our understanding of violence really quickly. I want us to think through the forms of violence that our communities experience as systemic, institutional, and interpersonal, right? Right now, with the wave of anti-Asian violence in particular, people tend to think of things as interpersonal, about what's going on in the streets, what's going on at work, at the workplace, between people. And I think it's really important that we understand that Asians, Pacific Islanders, Black Indigenous communities have experienced multiple forms of violence that made these interpersonal forms of violence even possible. So you want to think about the history of chattel slavery as systemic and ongoing violence. You want to think about colonialism as ongoing forms of violence that made these like interpersonal forms of violence possible. You want to think about climate injustices and this climate disaster that we're living under as forms of racial justice and racial violence, right? We want to think about what's going on with our Pacific Islander communities here and in their homelands, right? Where people are having to become climate refugees across the diaspora. That is racial violence that doesn't get accounted for when we talk about what's going on with our communities, right? But more specifically right now under COVID, what we've been thinking through or analyzing, right? And many of people already know this, but under COVID in particular, we're seeing a disproportionate representation of Black, Indigenous, Asian, Pacific Islanders, and Native Hawaiians being overrepresented in positive cases, right? American Indians or Native Americans, Alaskan Natives are 2.8 times more likely to have COVID positive cases than white communities, right? Asians are 1.1% more likely to have a positive case of COVID. Our Black and African American communities are 2.6 times more likely. Our Latinx communities are 2.8 times more likely, right? And this doesn't even go to what's going on with our Native Hawaiian communities, our Pacific Islander communities, right? They're not even being represented in the data. So that's what's going on. It's an overrepresentation in our cases. I haven't even, kind of touched upon hospitalization, haven't given you all the numbers around the deaths because that would be really, really morbid on the heels of so many deaths. But you can count on the fact, unfortunately, that we are overrepresented in that as well. So that's going on. And that to me are forms of racial violence, right? You also want to think about why are our communities being, why are we overrepresented? And it isn't only because of underlying health conditions, though that is primary, right? The underlying conditions that have most impacted COVID positive cases and deaths are asthma, right? Are hypertension, are diabetes, and unfortunately, Black, Native, Asian, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islanders, we are all overrepresented. Latinx communities, we are overrepresented in these underlying health conditions. And why are we overrepresented? Not only are we talking about a neglect in healthcare, not only are we talking about, historic economic disparities, right? But we wanted to think about kind of the impacts of intergenerational trauma on our bodies, right? So you want to think about how these overrepresentation of our communities in this health, in the health data, in particular around this pandemic, it's cumulative. We are impacted because of cumulative effects of racialized violence that has been historic, right? And then in terms of additional things that our communities are experiencing, we are more likely to be exposed to the global health crisis or the pandemic because we are the ones that are the essential workers, right? Black and immigrant communities are overrepresented in essential, in the essential workforce. Maybe I won't say overrepresented, but there's a whole bunch of us, right? We're the ones that are out, you know, bagging groceries. We're the ones that are out delivering the mail. We're the ones that are out, you know, doing these things that people barely pay attention to. And we're the ones that are sustaining this country, right? But we are also the ones being held captive in these conditions because we don't have the money or the privileges to not work in these conditions, right? That means we're also being exposed to the pandemic. I also want us to think through what's happening to the unemployment rates, right? That means that Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Asian, immigrant communities, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders are overrepresented in unemployment. The data, right? I won't, I mean, I can share with you the data and you guys can ask me for it in a minute, but I also want you to think in terms of the intersections, right? So we're overrepresented in the racial data, but women are also doubly impacted. We're more impacted by the unemployment rates than our cisgendered men are, right? And then when you add in issues of our trans communities and our gender non-conforming communities, they are also, right? But it's not, the data isn't being kind of accounted for. Those are forms of violence that we have to think through. And then we also want to think through the interpersonal forms of violence and the institutional violence, right? So for Asian communities in particular, there has recently been a report, an updated report of about more than 2,500 reports of hate violence happening to Asian communities in particular. 40% of them belong to California. Okay, so we have a high rate of Asians here out in this state, and we also have a high rate of anti-Asian violence. That is important. I want us to also think through expanding the numbers. 2,500 is a lot, but it also doesn't account for maybe the forms of violence that are ongoing, which includes incarceration, which includes detention rates. There have been since, I think it was the 90s or so, the late 90s or so, there have been close to 20,000 Southeast Asians who have been deported from this country. That is a form of violence, and our communities are continuing to be deported under COVID. To where? Under COVID, right? And then you want to think about the violence that's happening inside these institutions, right? We've already heard what's going on with ICE and forced sterilization of our Black and brown communities, right? But you want to think about the exposure to COVID in detention centers, in prison, right? So these are the forms of violence that continue to happen under COVID. And then you want to continue to think about the police violence that our Black and our Native communities are continuously subjected to, but more specifically the anti-Black police violence, right? In a study that I found, 1 in every 1,000 Black men and boys can expect to be killed by police in this country. And that pandemic has not stopped under this global health pandemic. We also have an account for voting suppression. So people, while there's this global pandemic that people are dying under and we're all wearing masks under, people are also dying in other forms and they're suffering in other ways at these various intersections. I can't even tell you all about the voting suppression that's happening in the South, in Florida, out here, right? But we're also thinking about in American Samoa or in Marshall Islands that are U.S. territories or grounds for where the U.S. has used as naval bases. Folks can't vote out there. That's a lot of people that cannot vote, but their lands can be used, right? But their people can be in the military, but folks can't vote. So for me, all these things are forms of racialized violence. But the good thing, right, without taking too much time or any more time, is to say our communities under this kind of climate are increasingly coming together. We're coming together and recognizing the spaces where we can align, where we can be accountable to one another, and where we can take care of each other. We're recognizing our privileges, where we need to step back and move forward, right? And this is unprecedented in the times where we're just like, yo, we can't do anything but come together. And that to me is what is most inspirational about this moment. And that's what we're recognizing. So thanks for the 30,000 minutes I just took.
Absolutely, and thank you so much, Dr. Connie. I mean, you answered direct to my question about what we're seeing in our communities right now. I myself, could feel a physical reaction to the statistics that we have here in California. And it's so important to walk us through the data, and I can totally understand if the data feels overwhelming and even sobering, y'all, but it's also empowering. This is how we tackle the foe of ignorance with data. And just as Dr. Chang showed us earlier at the beginning, the data is important to collect and then analyze to understand the disparities and where we should focus our attention. Also to dispel any myths that our data proves as myths. And I appreciate your statement, Dr. Connie, of we are impacted because of cumulative effects of racial violence. And then if we're not tracking that data, we don't see that cumulative effect. So I would just note for those who like data, as I do, that there's a 12 p.m. session called Empower API Community with Data, where they will dive in a little bit to data disaggregation. I also highly encourage you all to go to one of API Women Leads movement building workshops. Dr. Connie and the other co-founder, her sister Jenny, have a great activity to help us connect the dots and really understand these levels of violence, systemic and interpersonal and institutional violence. So thank you again for answering that question of, what is it looking like right now and why this is important, especially right now. And with the National Civic Leadership Forum, coming to a close this weekend, we are hoping to really instill this idea that your voice really, 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 really matters. It truly does. Locally, statewide, federally, and the way that you can make sure that you're using your voice in a really informed way is by knowing the issues and looking at the data. So thank you again, Dr. Connie, for that reminder. This next question I'd like to pose to Susan to answer. And it is, the Asian community is no stranger to a history of racism, having been targeted throughout history and via the Chinese Exclusion Act and Japanese incarceration, just to name a few. Can you share about some of the parallels of injustice that have occurred against Asian and Black communities? And what have we learned from our ancestors' experiences and our current lived experience? And if you could also talk about what does the model minority have to do with that?
Sure. Thank you so much. So I don't look at the Black and Japanese American communities and see parallels per se, but I want to tell you how our people have been really intertwined, both in our day-to-day lives, as well as on a larger historical and political scale in the struggle against white supremacy. So we were knitted together, to use this metaphor, in San Jose, Japantown, which grew as a sanctuary from white hostility towards Chinese, Japanese, and Filipino Americans starting in 1887. And it was also a home and a segregated community for Black San Joseans since even before that. And the Chinatown and Japantown area, was the redlined area in San Jose. And realtors cautioned white people from, investing in the area because of, and I quote from the report, it said, too many Orientals and Negroes. So we were knitted together there. In 1942, some Black Americans stood up for us when the federal government issued the order for Japanese Americans to be removed and incarcerated. For example, the California Eagle, which was a progressive Black newspaper, opposed the order and called the incarceration shameful. At the same time, Hugh Macbeth, a Black civil rights attorney from Los Angeles, stepped forward to help defend Nisei, who are my parents' generation, while they were trapped behind barbed wire. And when nativists sued to remove their citizenship rights and their right to vote. So we were defended when we were helpless. We were also united in the 1960s in the fight to establish ethnic studies. So this was a joint effort to stop the erasure of the actual histories of our people in the United States. And at the same time, the Black liberation movement helped inspire and grow the Asian American movement. Again, another point in history, our fates were interwoven when we discovered a provision in the law that would have funded and authorized mass incarceration of protesters who would most likely have been Black people on the basis of, on the sites of the former World War II concentration camps. In 1967 through 1971, Japanese Americans led the effort to repeal that law, which was called Title II of the Emergency Detention Act. And in 1980, which was 35 years after the camps were closed, Japanese Americans struggled to unite our community for redress and reparations, and Black Americans were the earliest and staunchest supporters. And it was historic when Jesse Jackson's presidential campaigns of 1984 and 1988 endorsed our redress legislation. And in San Jose, we redress activists were a part of the Jackson campaigns, and we were part of the Rainbow Coalition. So citing parallels doesn't completely illuminate. It's not really the right math. It's not the right geometry. Partly because the oppression of Black people predates the formation of this country. And the Black liberation movement has international stature. I think some people forget that. And Japanese Americans have been here for only about 150 years, starting when Chinese immigration was choked off. But white supremacy needed a way to reconcile the existence of Asian immigrants who were not white or Black. And many of us don't know this. Many Japanese Americans don't even know this, that the model minority strategy was prototyped on the back of Japanese Americans. So government agencies sent sociologists into the camps to study us. They used us against each other by encouraging us to fight each other as loyal versus disloyal. And then when they let us out of camp, they blamed us for our own incarceration because they said, you failed to assimilate. And they criticized Japanese Americans for speaking Japanese. They warned Japanese Americans against gathering in groups larger than 3, and they threatened us to keep our heads down. So when some Japanese Americans were homeless after being released, the US government pointed to those of us who had recovered quicker, and they used us to quote unquote prove to the world that despite Jim Crow, the US was a democracy and that equality was a reality, and that the proper way to deal with racism was just to not complain about it. So this strategy was meant to control us and to keep us separate so that we could be used. And it was meant to keep us from uniting with other people of color. So if our communities were intertwined in the fabric of the struggle for equality, then the model minority strategy was like a seam ripper. The model minority strategy was strong and it defined how white people dealt with us. And it was also devious because it took advantage of the immigrant drive to make it. And one of us even wrote a book called Nisei, The Quiet Americans. And some people started believing that lauding ourselves for achievement was better than equality. So I was 24 years old, and it was 35 years after the camps closed when I started getting involved in our redress movement, which in itself was a powerful rejection of the model minority. And they used the model minority to try to squash our movement. They held the model minority out as a carrot and a stick. So it's been 40 years since then, and what have we learned? Well, we're still fighting the use of the model minority strategy against Japanese Americans. We're fighting it against the use of it against other Asian Americans, and we're still trying to stop it from being used like a club against the Black community. And so it seems like that's our ongoing burden, to fight the model minority strategy and keep it from being used, and to continue to organize our people to unite and to mobilize our people in concrete ways to forge equality and to forge friendship and unity and solidarity. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that, Susan. I think, you know, there's been so much conversation around the model minority myth, and just this note that you have about it being devious because it tries to take advantage of that spirit of drive that we already have, and it's using it to pin us against each other. And this idea of lauding ourselves for achievement is better than equality reminds me of Pastor Moore's question to us earlier of when we're not seeing Black people get hired, when we're not seeing them get promoted or get the funding. Why is that? And is it maybe some of it is ourselves still really focused on our own efforts and seeing more people look like us, but we've got to pave the way to see people that look like everyone in all of these seats, at all of these tables, at all of these boards. So I really appreciate you, Susan, sharing with us just the vast history that there really has been this collaboration, this community building and coalition building that's been around for a really long time, that we have been supported by the Black community, and we need to support them as well, as we always have tried to back each other up. And I think it's important that we all know that this isn't a new thing, that this movement is not new, that this movement is not local, and that every single thing that we can do about it, again, piggybacking on the idea with just tackling our own issues ourselves and hearing how we might be pursuing the model minority myth in our own kind of personal and professional agendas is super important and critical for us to think about. And I appreciate that, again, Susan, for you laying that out. So this next question I'd like to bring to Eric. And Eric, the question is, with regards to legislation at the local, state, and federal levels, there are many policies being considered that attempt to address racism and inequity. One of these is Prop 16. Can you tell us what Prop 16 is and how it affects Asian and Black communities?
Yes, thank you for this question. Proposition 16 is a constitutional amendment that is going to be on the November ballot in California. And what it's going to do is it's going to undo Proposition 209, which was passed in 1996. Prop 209 states that California institutions can't grant preferential treatment to persons on the basis of race, sex, national origin in the fields of public employment, public education, and public contracting, right? So Prop 16 doesn't mandate any preferences to certain races or sex. It just reverses the ban from Prop 209, and essentially it opens up the toolbox.
Thank you for explaining that. And the Asian American community in California has been particularly divided on this issue. Is that right? And what would you wish people to know about the issue as we get closer and closer to the elections?
Yes, yes. So there's been a lot of discussion on this issue. I think there's two things that I wish got a little bit more attention. And so the first is that everybody talks about Prop 16 as an affirmative action in education, right? But the reality is that is a tiny part of Prop 16 that gets a disproportionate amount of attention, right? Prop 16 is way, way bigger than that. Prop 16 is about jobs, it's about public contracts, it's about promotions, right? If you look at the data that's out there, right? Who gets paid what? Who gets hired for what? The data shows racism, and it shows a problem, right? Minorities, including Asians, including women, get paid less. They get promoted less, right? In public schools, 75% of the K through 12 students are minorities, right? But 65% of the teachers are white. And so everybody obsesses about these numbers of getting into UCLA, getting into UC Berkeley. But it's just so narrow, right? Prop 16 is about who gets to teach at those schools, right? Who gets to coach there? Who gets promoted there, right? Just UCLA Hospital, right? Not even UCLA, the school, or the rest of the UC system, or all the other institutions in California. Just the UCLA Hospital spends billions of dollars on contracts, right? Construction, janitorial, recruiting, supplies, software, right? All of this money disproportionately leaves out minorities, right? And after Prop 209 was passed, so many of these minority-owned businesses were wiped out. The second point that I want to make is that Asians benefit from affirmative action too, even in education, right? And that's because Asians aren't this one singular group, right? There's 50 different subgroups of Asian Americans just in California. And so many of these subgroups are underrepresented, and they're going to benefit from affirmative action in education, right? And then depending on the field of study, Asians are also underrepresented in so many different fields, right? People talk about the underrepresentation of Asians in Hollywood. Well, with affirmative action, maybe we can start getting more Asians into film school, into theater school, right? More Asians into writing and screenwriting programs. I think same with politics, right? Prior to Prop 209, Asians were underrepresented in public policy and law programs, and affirmative action benefited many of the Asian politicians that we see today. Assemblymember Phil Ting in San Francisco, former Sunnyvale Mayor Otto Lee, they've both publicly talked about how affirmative action helped get them into their graduate programs, right? So to recap, I guess my 2 points, it's one, Prop 16 is so much bigger than education. And then two, even in the education context, Prop 16 benefits us too.
Thank you so much for that, Eric. And I do feel that like when it comes to a lot of these propositions, this issue of like a really, really tiny part of it being so disproportionately focused on really skews the issue, really skews the potential benefits for communities, and it's misleading. And it feels deceitful in some ways as well. So it's so important to have folks like you who can really break it down for us. And I believe that in a little bit, we're going to be able to talk a little bit more about Prop 16 as well. So I'm going to ask to close out the questions that we have for the panel with a final one so that we can open up to the community Q&A, because I do see quite a few questions. And so that last question, and this is for all panelists, and I would like to have Susan start us off. But basically, as we look into the future and take our next steps towards true solidarity, what is one piece of advice that you would offer? Whether you want to talk about another piece of policy action, I don't know, for example, Susan, there's HR 40, folks may want to know about. If it's about just carrying yourself as a leader doing this very challenging work and how you stay grounded through the work without getting too overwhelmed. Or even it's very personal, and how do you tap into joy while advancing this work, which feels so very much, overwhelming and sobering. But one last thought that you have that you'd like to share with the audience before the Q&A. And I'd like to have Susan start, and then I'll ask Dr. Connie to go next, followed by Eric.
Okay. Let's see. Well, I mentioned fighting the model minority. So when you do this kind of political work, you think about it all the time. And so when the issue of HR 40 came up, when Democratic Party candidates were starting to endorse HR 40, it occurred to us immediately that somebody was going to start asking Japanese Americans about our own redress struggle. And we wanted to make sure, or to influence the Japanese American community to not have a model minority response to that. So what we did was we started having community discussions. And in terms of joy, one of the things that's really enjoyable is to sit down and talk to people about meaningful issues. So we talked about like what our own redress struggle meant to us and how transformative we feel it was for us, but also how incredibly rewarding it was to feel like we had transformed this country, that now it was non-controversial that the concentration camps were wrong. And now journalists have to say that it was wrong, and politicians have to say that it was wrong. So that's, so political accomplishments are joyful, but I'll just say that, another thing is to have a lot of friends in the movement who like to laugh as much as I do. And I think that there's also joy in sad places. Ruth Bader Ginsburg's efforts to hold on were just heroic, and we owe her so much. And, I was kind of hoping that she'd have a chance to retire if she wanted to after the election, but she'd probably go out with her boots on. But, she was an inspiration, and inspiration brings us joy as well as tears. And it makes me want to live as long as I can, just like she did. And it makes me want to do as much as I can on a different front of the same larger fight. So that's.
Thank you so much for that, Susan. And I'm sure that folks are looking to you with the same just feeling of inspiration. And I think that that's really important. I want to say that one more time, that for individuals, champions that we've experienced, champions that are on this webinar, champions on the other side of the screen right now, inspiration brings us joy as much as tears. That was really well said. Thank you for that. I'd like to ask Dr. Connie to go next. You're on mute, my dear.
Oops. Oh, thank you. So thanks for the question. I think they're both of the same. My kind of last remarks are freedom is what brings me joy. I'm going to have to say that. Working for freedom and all access to freedom brings me joy. And in that respects, I find freedom in working with communities. And so that's probably my biggest point for folks who are listening and folks on the panel. I think teaming up with each other, because as we can see under this moment, doing things by ourselves and trying to climb any ladder, or sitting at the bottom of the ladder, or the ladder being on top of you by yourself, is a very lonely and alienating experience. And to me, community is everything. And our struggle for freedom, and when we win it, is what would bring us the greatest joy. That's that.
Thank you for that, Dr. Connie. And I know that we all want to also enjoy the journey getting to whatever that beautiful, precious outcome is. But I think it's important, as you said, community, not working in isolation, by sharing in each other's stories, by hearing each other's stories, by tapping into our ancestral stories. You know, we learn more about ourselves, and we learn more about ourselves through each other too. And thank you for the reminder that community can be everything. I feel the same way. I'd like to ask Eric to go next.
Thank you. I think that's a really great question to close with. You know, my advice, I think, is to listen more and understand that there's always room to learn. With regards to staying grounded and tapping into joy, I think I draw strength from my family, you know, my wife, my parents, my siblings. And then I think about how far we've come, right? It can be really discouraging when, you know, we have a president that says the things he does, right? And that does the things he does. But, you know, I think about the struggles of the people, you know, just that people have faced, I think, just 30 years ago, and where we are now. And, you know, that's exciting to me. And that allows me to, you know, I tap into that. And, you know, even when the work is difficult and heavy, it helps me stay grounded.
For that, Eric. Listening more. I think that was a great thing to remind folks of, because I think sometimes we listen to hear something, but to really listen with an open mind and open heart to the other person. I feel you on that. Thank you for sharing that. And Pastor Moore, would you like to close us off with your final thoughts and words for folks?
Oops, sorry. Wow. I was so moved by so much, and Connie made me just think there's so much that we have to do to get together, and all those territories that she was mentioning, we make them states, but let's leave them alone. They become part of the United States with every right of a U.S. citizen. Go on every one of those countries. I'm just amazed when we hear that and start thinking about it. So we have so much to do. We have to look at, again, this. We've come together as one in the 60s. We changed this country. We have to look at today's opportunity now, where our brothers, some of them, the lighter hue, the white-skinned people, Europeans, they're feeling a great threat of loss of control, loss of their own identity. And all we're trying to do as a people is just have our histories correctly recorded. We want to have the same life and pursuit of happiness that this country has promised us for so long. So I look forward to increasing my family. You guys know I was at Independence High School one year, and they have some Pacific Island kids out there, and I love it when they get together and they dance their steps, you know. And I had to encourage them to get out there and do it one year. Our job is to come together as people, encourage one another, wherever we're at, that your culture is unique, your culture is valuable, charitable, your culture is important. We are the best part of what makes America great. There were so many different places. No place in the world really has that. Let's make America be America. Langston Hughes says head so often for us as people of color. America has never been America to me. But it's time for us to take it back and show just what a real patriot is, who actually has given our blood, our sweat and our tears to this nation and never been given the respect totally due. From the Chinese Exclusion Act, they didn't want the Chinese here, to the mistreatment of the Japanese people and Pacific Islanders, to the African American and to the indigenous people who were here in this nation from the very beginning. I strive in my talk, I try to make sure that we are given landmarks, given places here in this county that they won't forget. We can't let them forget. More than anything, we have to learn and believe that only we can do it together. Together we can make this place be what we want it to be. Together, walking hand in hand, understanding and loving each other's culture. So I want to thank everyone for putting this panel together and allowing me to be on it. As we go through this pandemic of COVID-19, Dr. Connie pointed out again, I've been on this county for so long, to release the names of those we've lost and put a picture on it. So often as people of color, you've always marginalized us by numbers, a percentage acceptable to be lost. Put our names out there, put our pictures out there so that we can be remembered and know that people of color are dying in record numbers during this pandemic. And we must find something to do to honor them. Again, I just want to thank you and wish everybody a great day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pastor Moore, for those closing remarks. And I echo your call to action that we have to believe that working together is the way to move forward, because then we can find those opportunities. And again, I hope to our audience here who's joining us that you've heard from our various panelists, all the different ways you can engage with their organizations, you can engage with their work. I'd now like to open it up to a Q&A from the audience. And I'm going to start off with this first question. And for our panel, I don't have anyone specifically to target this to, so please go ahead and unmute yourself if you're ready to, if you would like to take a chance at it. So the first question for our panel is, what are the best ways to communicate to people that we are uncomfortable with because of how they are normalizing microaggressions towards Asians? And I would expand this to Asians and our Black brothers, sisters, and non-gender conforming family. But what are some of the best ways to communicate with those who are already applying microaggressions or normalizing them?
Thanks, Susan. I'll take a stab at that. So one of the reasons why people commit microaggressions and is because they're looking at you and they're not really seeing who you are. They're seeing a stereotype and they're seeing things that they think are true, and they feel knowledgeable about who they think you are. And I think that one way to respond is just to inform them of who you really are. And I think what we have to do is we have to say it like a leader. We're not asking them for permission to tell our truth. We're saying our truth. You know, we're not begging them to notice that we're disagreeing with them. I think what we're doing is we have to be a leader and we have to say what's true, and we just point it out to them. And I think that the more of us that do that, we're not begging them, we're saying it because it's true. So that's.
Thank you for that, Susan. I dropped that in the chat because it was so good. We have to say it like a leader. We are not asking for permission to tell our truth. We are saying our truth. And that has a big difference with how you're going to say it, you know, with how confident you feel and how empowered you feel. So thank you for saying that. And Dr. Connie, you're unmuted, but I just want to see if you wanted to respond.
I just loved what Susan said, because to me, sometimes when people say racist things, micro or macro, I just tend to just say, that was racist. And I'll just say, well, and I'm like, if you're going to normalize microaggressions, I'm going to normalize calling you racist. And then we're going to normalize you stopping it. There goes that, you know? So I think we should have confidence in saying, I didn't like that. I don't consent to the way you're talking to me. And I get to not consent. And I get to also, you know, tell you, figure that out, or read a book,
or actually, I am no longer talking to you. I will see you later, right? So these are the things that I think we have to embody, because that's the truth, right? As Susan says, we're gonna normalize you not being racist. How about that? I feel like that's how I would respond to it. I hope that helps.
I can totally hear you saying it like that, Dr. Connie.
Yeah, that's racist, guys. That's racist.
With a smile, no less. It is possible. And I appreciate that. And you know, for your own steez, everybody, whatever is your steez at saying that, whatever is your style or your approach. But I think, you know, echoing Dr. Connie and Susan, do not be afraid to speak your truth. And with all of the history that was just shared with us, we have been taught to be afraid of sharing our truth, especially if it doesn't align with people that we love, people that we trust, or people that we hold in high regard or respect. So that idea of being a leader, you don't have to be a manager, you don't have to be a CEO, you don't have to be an executive director, you can still speak your truth as a leader in your family, as a leader in yourself, right? So thank you for that. I'm gonna go ahead, and because I don't see anyone else unmuted, did anyone else want to add to that question, or I'll pose the next one? All right, so here's a good one. And I'll go ahead and ask either Pastor Moore or Eric to go for this one next. So this one asks, since fear does not allow room for solidarity because it creates the idea of an other, how can the issue of fear be effectively addressed and eradicated?
How can fear be eradicated?
I know, it's a big question. How can it at least be effectively addressed in the path to eradication?
Well, I just believe that you have to face your fears. And until you face them, they'll always be there. There was a time where you were scared as a kid to get up in the night, you know, you ball up in the covers. But then as you start to understand, this is my room. I know where everything is in this room, you know. Oh, I know what that is. And then you get up and you face it. So I think together we're going to have to face the fear that these white militias are trying to bully us into believing, right? Or the current president, as he has his rhetoric on hate. We have to face hate with understanding and love and knowledge. And so the challenge for us in this field that we're currently in is going to be what was the Willie Lynch theory is, as you beat the slaves or the brave slave or the one that talks back so the other ones don't. What we have to do is continue to stand up and face that syndrome of fear and take it head on is the best I can say. I know that one day I'm going to die, you know, so that's inevitable. How, I do not know. But I do not go into the battles I go into worrying about that. I'm fighting to make tomorrow a better day for the future of my kids, for the future of their kids, your kids, our kids, for the future of this country, out of Santa Clara County. So all the things here in Santa Clara County, is the way they try to manipulate you or whatever it is, I don't know. I'm just saying, there's nothing to fear but fear itself. I guess it's the same, right? So you have to look at that imposter. You triumph and disaster just the same. You win and you lose. And mostly you lose, but you got to keep fighting. So I just want to encourage everybody, we keep fighting, because if we don't, who will? Thank you.
Oh, snaps, yes, yes. And I already know that so many of the champions on this panel agree with that. Eric, your follow-up?
I wanted to echo my support for what Pastor Moore just said. The only thing I would add is that I think we tend to fear what we don't understand. And so part of, I don't want to repeat myself, but I think part of, listening more and understanding more, helps us fight that fear too.
Thank you so much, Eric and Pastor Moore. And do we have time for one more question? I think we might. All right, I'm gonna ask it. So last question, how do we find communities and be active members? And how do we become community builders and leaders? And I'm going to ask each of our panelists to answer that question, and then we'll close it out to move to the next part of our agenda. Would anyone like to take a stab at that first? So how do we find communities and be active members? And how do we become community builders and leaders?
I'll take a stab at that. So a lot of times, you know, I meet people and sometimes I see them online and people are wondering, what should I do? And I always tell people, you know, look around in your community. There must be organizations, right? Join it and see if that's a good fit for you. And I also tell people, you know, you have the option of starting an organization. You know, you have the option of getting together with your 3 or 4 friends and starting to do something and starting to build something. So I think that people, that's part of the fear, right? Is facing the fear that you know, and being a leader, you know, you can do that. You know, a lot of what we did in the redress movement, we were really young and we didn't know what we didn't know, but we just started doing things, and through doing things we learned. And so I just think it's like, stick to it, struggle through it, try to figure out what's going on, self-reflection. But yeah, look in your community and start something if it's not already there.
Eric, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I would say, I think, you know, a big part of it is just looking for people who are like-minded. You know, and I think it just starts by pursuing things that you're interested in. You know, for me, I'm interested in racial justice, you know, economic justice. You know, I'm a former prosecutor, so I'm interested in criminal justice. And that's how it starts. You know, I just look for things that I'm interested in, I research things that I'm interested in, and I talk with people who are interested in those same things.
Thank you so much, Eric. And Dr. Connie and Pastor Moore, any closing thoughts on this question?
I'll jump on it. I was asked that question here recently, and I'll tell you this, is I don't necessarily have to be the champion in understanding the mistreatment or maltreatment of people coming in to this country to know what's wrong.
Yeah.
I don't have to jump in it and be the leader in that. I actually still my support and ask, how can I help? Where can I be a wheel on this cart? How can I be someone behind it pushing this cart? How can I support you? I tell them in a minute, I don't agree with what's happening to you. If it's at work, I'll pull a coworker, hey, man, I don't like the way so-and-so said that to you. If you're not comfortable with it, let me know. And if you need some help going to them together, let's go to them together. But it's about, like I said, I love humanity. I love us as humans. I love us as people. And if we can learn to bring out the best in each other, to bring out the best with each other, I don't have to know the example, the Vietnamese woman out there on the street and see someone talking bad to her and just walk by. That's not in my nature as a human being. My nature is to say something and to try to engage to stop the mistreatment and maltreatment. If all of us did that, when people make off-colored jokes, I'm not the one laughing at them. I'm the one saying, I don't know if that's proper. You know, so it's just time for us to learn that Dr. King said it best, we're interconnected. What hurts me hurts you. And if I'm not there, then you're the only person there of color. You will be the next butt of the joke. So we have to join in. And for our Anglo brothers and sisters, our white brothers and sisters, they need to partner with us and help stop this as well. Our country is on the brink of, I don't know what's going to happen if this man stays in office. I don't know if we're going to be able to get him out of office legitimately. And so, yeah, so there's so much that we just got to do to help each other, support each other, and try to make sure everybody's treated equally and fairly and given a fair plane to be judged, to have opportunities, and to succeed. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Pastor Moore. And we are out of time, but Dr. Connie, I want to see if you have one last thing to say, and then when you're done, I would like to ask the panelists to get ready for a group picture, and then I'll pass it on to Dr. C.
My quick answer, folks, is to find your political home. You know, we need to organize, and we really, really, really need to have each other's backs beyond our immediate identities. Identity is not enough. Identity is not consciousness. So we really, really need to educate, organize, take care of each other, and mobilize accordingly. Echoing Susan's point, find your political home. And I'm going to respond to Keisha's point in the chat. You know, you may lose some people, but when you lose people, you're also going to gain a whole bunch more.
Hey, Dr. Connie. All right, so prepping the panelists. Pastor Moore, if you can turn on your camera very quick. We want to get a panelist picture, and then Dr. C will take it over to move us into the program. And someone should probably tell us when the picture is taken so we can stop smiling. But Pastor Moore's camera's almost up, I think.
It's probably frozen.
There it is. There you go. All right. I'm going to start smiling. Someone take it.
Thank you. Thank you so much to the panelists. Thank you so much to the moderator. What a wonderful sharing experience and of information and involvement, and also all the ideas for how to get involved. We're going to go ahead and quickly turn over to Efrain Delgado, who has brought for us more ideas, easy ways to get involved in mobilizing our community for this upcoming election. So over to Efrain.
Thank you for the introduction, Dr. C. Good morning, y'all. My name is Efrain Delgado, and I use he, him pronouns. I work with the Asian Law Alliance as the Civic Engagement Community Organizer. In that role, I support a coalition of partner organizations throughout Santa Clara County, many of whom are actually community partners for today's summit, so shout out to y'all. Additionally, I coordinate ALA's in-house civic engagement programming, and at the moment, I'm at a crossroads where we have programs set up and action opportunities. We just need volunteers. So I'll be sharing information with y'all about that. It was great to hear from our amazing speakers. Their diverse experiences, knowledge, and relationship really set us up for true transformational change. And I think the most appropriate way to wrap up our summit is to leave you all with tangible things to act upon. So to wrap up our summit, we'll provide information on these calls to action. Next slide, please. But first, we're actually gonna call back to some data you saw earlier. We got to aggregate, or rather disaggregate, a lot of the data and responses you all provided to some of the registration questions. And we wanted to review them as a real reminder as to why we're asking you to move into action, right? This first question, what motivates you to participate in the upcoming election? The majority of you answered impacting who gets elected. Following that, we had folks saying that they'd like to protect their community. And then after that, fulfilling civic duty and other reasons. Those three reasons at the top, you're gonna be able to impact your community in a really great way if you sign up for some of our action opportunities. So we hope you get to feel like you're living up to that motivation. Next slide, please. And now this next slide, we'll see y'all's responses to the question, which action steps would you like to get involved in? Several of you were super hyped for voter registration and education. ALA does a lot of that kind of work. Also getting out the vote via phone banking and text banking, no worries, we have opportunities for that. And also National Voter Registration Day, followed by census work and poll monitoring. And a quick note, I see many of you are unsure or undecided, which is fine. But I'm here to demystify your uncertainty and hopefully try to get you to move into action. So next slide, please. So this first action opportunity or call to action is for Yes on Prop 16. I won't get into too much details. We've been able to have one of our panelists give us a lot of information for this, but ALA is going to be supporting the passing of Yes of Prop 16 through phone banking and text banking. So if you're interested, I just see that the link was dropped in the chat box. You can also pull out your phone, take a quick picture of the QR code, myself and a couple other ALA staff will be leading these phone sessions. So you'll see my face again, and we'll walk you through a training and provide support throughout these sessions as well. And can I get the next slide, please? Awesome. And now, actually, many of you may be sitting at home wondering, what is phone banking? What is text banking? Well, today we're going to give you a quick live mock phone call of what it'll be like when you're calling someone. And so to help me out, I'm going to actually have Meredith be the person I'm calling. I will be a volunteer, and I'm going to demonstrate to you all what a quick and easy phone call can be when you volunteer for the Yes on Prop 16. So let's see. Meredith, are you ready?
I am.
Awesome. So I'm going to take out my phone, type in her phone number. Ring, ring, ring. Hello.
Hi.
Hi, is Meredith available?
Hi, yes, this is Mare. Who is this?
Hi, yes, this is Efrain Delgado. I'm a volunteer with the Yes on Prop 16 campaign. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for asking. What is Prop 16?
Yeah, so thank you for asking. Prop 16, it's a statewide ballot proposition to end the ban on affirmative action and help ensure equal opportunity for all Californians. It is an opportunity for Californians to tackle systemic racism and sexism. Prop 16 ends the ban on affirmative action and levels the playing field for women and people of color so we can all succeed together.
Okay, that's helpful to know. I actually am a woman and a person of color, so I'd like to learn more. You mentioned that this would help fight sexism?
Yes, definitely. So women currently are discriminated against in employment, pay, and educational opportunities, and paid just 80 cents for every $1 men make for the same position, even less for women of color and single mothers. And so Prop 16 would allow California to enact programs to expand opportunities for women, recruiting more women in STEP, science, technology, engineering, and math, STEM, jobs, opening up contracting opportunities for women, owned businesses, and more.
Okay, wow, that is a lot. It would be great if we were able to fix any one of these problems. Can you tell me more about how it would fight racism?
Yes, of course. So Prop 16 would also allow Californians to enact programs that help close the K-12 education gap, increase college recruitment support, and create mentorship programs and expand access to public jobs, contracts, and promotion opportunities for people of color. Prop 16 is one of our best tools to root out discrimination in all of its forms this November. Can we count on you to vote yes on Prop 16 this November?
If Prop 16 deals with sexism and racism, yes, go ahead and count me in.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Meredith, and I hope you have a great night. Thank you, or day.
Thanks.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for the help, Meredith. And there you go, y'all. That call, all of your calls won't be exactly like that, but most of them will, I hope. And we have all the training. We have the call scripts. Everything's going to be virtual, so you'll be doing it from home. And so please click on that link to sign up. Now, next slide, please. And to rally us up, there's actually going to be a South Bay rally happening next week on Wednesday, September 23rd from 5 to 7 p.m. Richard Conda and a lot of other leaders in the South Bay area are going to be riling us up as we begin our on-the-ground work to convince people to vote yes. So please join us. There's a QR code, and the link was just dropped in the chat box as well. Next slide, please. I heard one of our panelists or speakers mention HR 40. I'm glad they did. We have an action opportunity for you all related to that. So for those of you who don't or are not familiar with HR 40, it's a bill named the Commission to Study and Develop Reparation Proposals for African Americans Act. It essentially would allow Congress to enact a study to see what it would take to truly make up for the fact that Black folks suffered through the era of slavery, and really the legacy of that has dragged on into our modern day reality, where a lot of folks face economic disparities. And so being able to fix that, we must use reparations, but we have to have a study first for it. And there's 3 ways you all can easily support this movement. The first is to sign the petition. Democracy in Color has one on their website. Just quickly give that QR code a scan, or follow the link in the chat box. On that same page with the Democracy in Color website, you'll be able to find a link for a podcast and listen, as Reverend Moore suggested we do, to a podcast named Democracy in Color with Steve Phillips. And lastly, we all must also do the work and do some reading. There's also a great link for something named This is the Perfect Moment to Push for Reparations by also Stephen Phillips. Wonderful. Can I get the next slide up, please? And now, one of our more exciting initiatives. Some of you may know that National Voter Registration Day is right around the corner. It's on the 22nd, which I believe is next Tuesday. And ALA is, of course, involved in National Voter Registration Day. We just launched a raffle this past week where we're going to be drawing weekly for a winner of a $75 gift card. There's going to be 5 total with the grand prize drawing of a $300 American Express gift card. And to participate, all you have to do is create a short video, at least 30 seconds or more. Other rules and regulations are listed on ALA's Facebook and Twitter posts with the official announcement. But you have to answer the question, why is voting important for you? And to give us a cool example, one of our community partners, Korean American Community Services, and one of their staff members, Serene Kim, has produced a video for us to check out. So we're gonna give it a quick play for y'all. Sorry about that, y'all. Maybe having technical difficulties. All right, let's roll with the punches, y'all. Audio's not.
Efrain, you're on mute.
Hi, y'all. Let's roll with the punches. The audio didn't work, but no fear. We already have posted that video on Facebook and Twitter. ALA's handle is @ALA Santa Clara for both pages, so please go follow us. If you would like to get more information via email, please take a picture of this QR code or follow the link that Van just provided to get announcements from ALA as well. And so the ways you can help with this project is follow us on those pages, share our future posts related to National Voter Registration Day, sign up for updates via the link that we just dropped, and also please submit a video yourself. It won't take very long. You'll motivate others to register to vote, and you'll be entered for a chance to win a gift card. Next slide, please. And the last opportunity I'd like to share with y'all is also led by the Asian Law Alliance. We are spearheading Santa Clara County poll monitoring. So what does that mean? We're gonna be assembling a team of volunteers to go out into different vote centers. There's gonna be about 100 vote centers in our county alone, and we're gonna train folks up to have a checklist to go make sure these vote centers have the appropriate ADA accessibility modifications and resources, the appropriate language, ballots, facsimiles to help people who are more comfortable in a non-English language, and also to make sure that there's appropriate staffing, that folks are following rules, and that things aren't getting unruly with these really long lines. So if you'd like to do your part, ALA will be spearheading the trainings, and we will also be providing a stipend for folks for this work. So if you are interested and would like to make some money while you help out your community, please sign up. We dropped the link in the bottom, or again, take out your smartphone and give the QR code a quick scan. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Richard Conda, who is the Executive Director of the Asian Law Alliance, to wrap up our summit.
Thank you so much, Efrain. And to our panelists and to our moderator, Mayor Curry, you did a great job moderating. We really appreciate it. To our panelists, Jeff, Connie, Susan, and Eric, thank you so much for your thoughtful, challenging remarks and calls to action. And also, I also want to thanks again to our organizing team, Dr. Michael Chang, Anthony Lay, Van Nguyen from the Asian Pacific American Leadership Institute, AAPI, Andrea Hyde and Sarita Coley from Asian Americans for Community Involvement, ACI, Anthony Ng from Civic Leadership USA, and Efrain Delgado from Asian Law Alliance, ALA. I think it's clear that systematic racism is a reality, that white supremacy is a reality. We need to continue to build solidarity. Ephraim has provided many opportunities for mobilization for the 2020 elections. Let's do it. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating, for being with us today. Have a great rest of the day.